Hajoon dropped the spoon. Not gently. Not slowly. He dropped it the way a man drops something that has genuinely surprised him. Fast, instinctive, like his hand decided before his brain could argue. Bola. His voice was flat. What did you put in this? Bola was already watching him from across the kitchen counter, arms folded, one eyebrow raised. She had been watching him since the first spoonful went in. She had been watching him the way Nigerians watch someone try their food, not with nervousness, but with a quiet, loaded confidence. Like a lawyer who already knows the verdict. Rice, she said. Tomatoes. Pepper. Stock. Love. The love part, Hajoon said, pointing at the pot, tastes like it's trying to fight me. Bola laughed, the kind of laugh that starts in the belly, and Hajoon looked at her like she had betrayed him, which only made her laugh harder. This was Tuesday evening in their apartment in Seoul. The windows were fogged from cooking steam. The pot of Jollof rice sat on the stove like a dare. And Hajoon, a 34-year-old Korean man who had eaten kimchi jjigae for breakfast his entire life, was standing in his own kitchen looking personally offended by rice. Try another spoon, Bola said. I just recovered from the first one. Hajoon. He picked up the spoon. He looked at it. He looked at her. He looked at the pot. And then, because he was, underneath everything, a man who loved his wife, he took another spoonful. The silence that followed lasted 4 full seconds. Okay, he said quietly. Okay. That's okay. Bola's arms unfolded. See. I didn't say I liked it. You didn't say you didn't. He took a third spoon without being asked. Bola noticed. She always noticed. That was the thing about 5 years of marriage. You stopped being able to hide the small truths. The way his jaw moved was different when he actually enjoyed something. The way he went quieter instead of louder. She had learned to read him like a second language, and right now the translation was clear. He liked it. He was just not ready to say so out loud. But here is what none of that laughter showed. Here is what the warmth of that kitchen did not tell you. 3 weeks before that Tuesday, Hajoon's mother had called. And what she said had been sitting between them like a stone. Neither of them had found the courage to move yet. If you've ever been in an intercultural marriage, if you've ever loved someone whose family looked at you and saw a problem to be solved, then stay with this story. Because what happened next in Bola and Hajoon's home is something that nobody talks about honestly. And we're going to talk about it. The call had come on a Sunday. Hajoon had taken it in the bedroom with the door closed, which he never did. Bola had been in the living room, folding laundry, pretending not to notice. She had folded the same shirt 3 times before she admitted to herself that she was listening. She couldn't hear the words. She could only hear the tone. And the tone from Hajoon's side was the one she dreaded most. The quiet, careful, agreeable tone he used when he was managing someone. Not arguing. Not defending. Just absorbing. When he came out, he looked normal. That was the first sign that something was wrong. Hajoon's normal face, when something was genuinely fine, was loose and open. This face was assembled. Constructed. My mother wants to visit, he said. Bola set down the shirt. When? 3 weeks. Okay. She waited. There was clearly more. She wants to stay for a month. Bola was quiet for a long moment. A month. She says she wants to spend time with us. With you. He paused. She hasn't seen you since the wedding. Which had been 2 years ago. And which had been, to use the most diplomatic word available, tense. Hajoon's mother, Park Sun-hee, was not a cruel woman. That was what made everything complicated. She was not the villain of this story, though it would have been easier if she were. She was a 61-year-old widow who had raised Hajoon alone after his father died, who had worked double shifts at a fabric shop in Daejeon so her son could go to university in Seoul, who loved her son with a specific, consuming, slightly suffocating love of a woman who had sacrificed everything for one person and needed to believe it had been worth it. When Hajoon had called to tell her he was marrying a Nigerian woman he'd met at a language exchange program, Sun-hee had not screamed. She had not threatened. She had said very quietly, "Is she Christian?" And when Hajoon said yes, Sun-hee had said, "I see," and then had not called back for 11 days. 11 days. Bola had counted. But Sun Hee had come to the wedding. She had sat in the front row in a pale blue hanbok. She had bowed when she was supposed to bow. She had smiled in the photographs. And she had said to Bola, through Hajoon's translation, "You are very beautiful. I hope you make my son happy." Which sounded like a blessing. But the way she had looked at Bola when she said it, with that careful, measuring, not quite warm gaze, had felt more like a terms and conditions agreement. Conditional. Provisional. Subject to review. That was 2 years ago. Now she was coming for a month. Bola went to the bedroom after that conversation and sat on the edge of the bed for a while. She was not crying. Bola was not a crier, not in the way people expected. Not in the immediate, explosive way. She cried the way water finds a crack. Slowly. Later. When she was alone and the lights were off and she had no more energy left to hold everything together. She called her sister Kemi instead. Kemi was in Lagos, 3 time zones away, and always answered on the second ring. "His mother is coming," Bola said. There was a pause. For how long? A month. Jesus Christ. A beat. "Bola, you know I love you, right? Why does that sound like a warning?" "Because it is. That woman did not look at you once during that wedding without her eye twitching. I watched her. She smiled in the photos." Smiling in photos is what people do when they disapprove of something but can't do anything about it. It's just organized misery. Kemi's voice softened. "How is Hajoon?" He said it like it was normal. Like a month is a normal amount of time for a mother-in-law to visit. In Korea, maybe it is. Well, I'm not Korean. The line was quiet for a moment. Then Kemi said something that Bola would think about for the rest of the 3 weeks leading up to the visit. Bola, the woman didn't lose. She just changed strategy. A month is enough time to make a man start reconsidering things without him even realizing it's happening. Bola had thought her sister was being dramatic. She would later wish she had listened harder. The jollof rice happened 6 days after that call. Hajoon had asked what she was cooking. She had told him. He had hovered near the kitchen the way he always did when she made Nigerian food. Curious, suspicious, drawn in despite himself. This had become one of their rhythms. She cooked. He orbited. Eventually he tasted. Eventually, he liked it more than he admitted. That night, after the 3rd spoonful and the silence in Bola's vindicated smile, they had eaten together at the small dining table with the window open, the October air coming in cool and carrying the smell of the street below. Hajoon had mixed the jollof rice with his kimchi, something that should not have worked, that Bola had initially protested loudly, and had declared the combination better than both. "That is food crime," Bola said. "Food evolution," he corrected, and she had thrown a napkin at him. This was them at their best. Relaxed and ridiculous and warm. This was the version of their marriage that Bola kept returning to in her head during the hard parts, like a compass point. This is real. This is ours. This is what's worth protecting. She would need to hold on to it very tightly in the weeks ahead. Because Sun Hee arrived on a Friday and by Saturday afternoon, Bola had already understood that this visit was going to cost something. The question was what? Sun Hee came with 2 large suitcases and a smaller bag that she held close, like it contained something precious. She stood at the apartment door looking smaller than Bola remembered, her white hair newly permed, wearing a beige cardigan over a floral blouse. She looked like someone's grandmother. She looked completely harmless. She said something in Korean. Hajoon translated. She says your home is very clean. Thank you, Bola said, and smiled. Sun Hee looked at the apartment the way people look at things when they are actually looking at the person who arranged them. Cataloging. Assessing. She noticed the Ankara throw pillow on the couch. The framed photo of Bola's family in Lagos is on the bookshelf. The small pot of Nigerian pepper soup Bola had made that morning, still on the stove, which now felt like both a welcome and a liability. The smaller bag, it turned out, contained ingredients. Korean ingredients. Doenjang, gochugaru, dried anchovies, perilla seeds, a bundle of dried seaweed. Sun Hee had brought them from Taejun like a kind of territorial claim. She had brought her kitchen into Bola's kitchen before she'd even sat down. Bola watched this happen and said nothing. Hajoon was delighted. "She's going to cook for us," he said. "She wants to make doenjang jjigae tomorrow." "Wonderful," Bola said, and meant it partly. But she also watched Sun. He moved through her kitchen touching things, moving the cutting board slightly, repositioning the dish rack, examining the spice shelf with an expression that was not quite disapproval but was not quite nothing either, and felt something in her chest tighten. This was not cruelty. That was what Bola kept reminding herself. This woman was not cruel. She was a mother in her son's home, and she was disoriented by how foreign it felt. The Ankara pillow. The Nigerian pepper on the shelf. The foreign daughter-in-law who spoke her language only in small pieces, who had taken her son and decorated his life with things she did not recognize. Bola understood this intellectually. Emotionally was a different matter. The first real friction came on Sunday. He had cooked breakfast, a full Korean spread, more food than the three of them could eat, laid out with the practiced efficiency of a woman who had been running a kitchen for 40 years. She and Hajoon spoke at length during the meal, fast Korean that Bola could follow maybe 40% of. She caught words: work, family, apartment, future, and lost the rest in the speed and the dialect. Hajoon translated occasionally. Summarized. But Bola knew the difference between translation and summary, and what she was getting was a summary. Abbreviated. Edited. After breakfast, she found a moment alone with him in the bedroom. "What were you two talking about?" she asked. He was changing his shirt. "Just catching up." She was asking about my work, about the apartment. "About me." A half-second pause. Almost nothing. But Bola had learned to read his pauses the way other people read punctuation. "She asked about children," he said. "When we're planning to start a family." Bola sat down on the bed. "And what did you say?" "I said we're still deciding." "We're not still deciding. We decided. We said we want to wait another year." "I know. I told her that." "What did she say?" He pulled his shirt down and looked at her. "Bola." "What did she say, Hajoon?" He sat down next to her. Took a breath. "She said she worries. About the cultural difference. About whether children in our home will know who they are." He paused. "She's not. She's coming from a place of concern. She lost my father young. She's thinking about legacy. About what gets passed down." Bola was quiet. Outside, she could hear Sunhee in the kitchen, washing dishes, the sound of water running and bowls clinking. "What she means," Bola said carefully, "is that she doesn't know if a half-Nigerian child will be Korean enough for her. That's what she means." "Bola." "I'm not angry. I'm just asking you to be honest with me about what's actually being said." He looked at his hands. "Yes," he said after a moment. "That's part of it." She nodded. She got up. She went back out to the living room and smiled at Sunhee when their eyes met. And Sunhee smiled back, warm, genuine, completely without irony, and held out a plate of leftover John she had saved from breakfast. The woman was not a villain. That was still true. It was also true that Bola now knew what this month was actually about. Do you know what it's like to be in a home that is technically yours, but to feel like you are the guest? If you've lived it, and so many people in this comment section have lived it, then you know exactly what the next 2 weeks felt like for Bola. We are going to get to the jollof rice again because it comes back, and what happens around it is the thing this whole story is really about. But first, keep watching, because what Hajoon does in the next part of this story is the thing nobody expected. Not even Bola. The second week of Sunhee's visit had a different texture than the first. The first week had been polite and careful, everyone performing their best versions of themselves. The second week was the week the performances started to slip. It started with food, because in this family, everything started with food. Bola had started cooking more Nigerian food. Not aggressively, she was not trying to make a point, or she told herself she wasn't, but because cooking was how she centered herself. When she felt displaced, she cooked. When she felt invisible, she cooked. The smells of her mother's kitchen in Lagos followed her into the kitchen in Seoul and reminded her that she existed before this apartment, before this marriage, before the measuring gaze of a woman who wasn't sure she was enough. Sun-hee watched her cook with the expression of someone trying very hard to be polite about something that was confusing them. "What is that?" Hajoon would translate, on Sun-hee's behalf. "Egusi soup. Ofada stew. Moin moin." Sun-hee would nod carefully. Once she had asked, through Hajoon, whether the ingredients were available in Korea. Bola had said yes, she had found a Nigerian store in Itaewon. Sun-hee had nodded again, with an expression that somehow managed to communicate that the existence of a Nigerian store in Seoul had never previously occurred to her as a possibility. But then something happened that Bola had not expected. On Wednesday of the second week, she came into the kitchen and found Sun-hee standing at the stove. Not cooking. Just standing, looking at the pot of leftover jollof rice from the night before. Looking at it with curiosity. Real curiosity. The unself-conscious kind that happens when no one is watching. "Ia mianim," Bola said. "Mother." She had been using the word carefully, not sure it was hers to use. Sun-hee startled slightly. Then she pointed at the pot. She said something in Korean. Bola didn't have Hajoon to translate. Just her 40% Korean and Sun-hee's 0% English and the pot between them. She pointed at herself. "I made it." Then she pointed at the pot. Then she made an eating gesture, hand to mouth. Sun-hee looked at her. Then she looked at the pot. Then she picked up the ladle herself and served a small spoonful into a bowl. "Bola vachid." Sun-hee tasted it. Her face did something complicated, the same kind of complicated that Hajoon's face had done, but with different feelings underneath. Where Hajoon's face had shown surprised delight, Sun-hee's face showed surprised uncertainty. And then, slowly, something shifted. Not delight, but something more honest than dismissal. She said something softly. Bola caught the word, mepta, spicy. But she also caught the word after it, which she had to run through her internal dictionary twice before she was sure, gange, strong. Or rather, powerful. "Yes," Bola said, even though she wasn't sure if the comment was a complaint or an observation. "Yes, it's strong." Sun-hee looked at her. And for the first time in 2 weeks, the look had nothing calculated in it. It was just two women in a kitchen, one of them holding a ladle, both of them slightly unsure what to say. Sun-hee put the ladle down. She went to the cabinet and got a different pot. She started pulling out her doenjang, her anchovies. She was making her jjigae. But before she started, she paused. She pointed at the jollof rice pot. Then she pointed at her own pot. Then she said something. "Bola vaitid." Sun-hee said it again, slower. Bola caught maybe half of it. But she caught the end, kachi, together. Together. She wasn't sure she had understood correctly. But Sun-hee was already gesturing, pointing at the jollof rice, pointing at her own ingredients, doing something with her hands that suggested, both. At the same time. A meal. Together. Bola stood there for a moment. Then she rolled up her sleeves and stood next to her mother-in-law at the stove. They cooked for 2 hours without sharing a common language. They communicated in pointing and gesturing and the occasional phone-translated word. Sun-hee tasted Bola's jollof rice base and added a small spoon of doenjang to her own pot in a way that felt responsive. Not copying. Just in conversation. Bola watched the Korean paste dissolve into its soup and thought about how strange and specific this moment was. It would never happen again in quite this way. When Hajoon came home that evening, he found the table set with 2 pots and mismatched bowls, and his wife and his mother sitting across from each other eating in silence, but a different silence than before. Not the silence of 2 people who had nothing to say. The silence of 2 people who had said something in the only language currently available to them and were now sitting with what they'd exchanged. He stood in the doorway for a moment. Then he said, "What's happening?" "Dinner," Bola said. "Is everyone? Did something happen?" "Sit down, Hajoon," both women said, in their separate languages, at almost exactly the same time. He sat down. This was the moment Bola had almost let herself believe would be enough. That the kitchen bridge, the small act of cooking side by side, had shifted something fundamental. She had almost let herself relax. Then the phone call came. Not to Hajoon this time. To her. It was Thursday. Hajoon was at work. Sunhee was in the living room watching a drama with earphones in, doing Bola the courtesy of leaving her alone. Bola was in the bedroom grading papers. She taught English at a language institute in Hongdae, 3 days a week, which she loved and which gave her something that was entirely hers. Her phone rang. Lagos number. Not Kemi. Her mother. Bola, her mother said, in Yoruba, in the voice she used when she was trying to be calm and not quite managing it. Your uncle spoke to me today. Bola stopped grading. Which uncle? Uncle Biodun. Biodun. Her mother's older brother. A man who had opinions about everything and delivered them with the cheerful confidence of someone who had never been wrong about anything in his own estimation. What did he say? He has been speaking to some people. About Hajoon. A pause. About his family. Bola felt something cold settle in her chest. What kind of people? What kind of speaking? He says he found some things. About the Park family. About the mother. Another pause. Bola, he says the woman's family never accepted the marriage. That she only pretended. That she has been waiting. Waiting for what? To bring Hajoon home. Back to Korea. Permanently. He says she has been talking to people in Daejeon about Hajoon coming back. About finding him work there. About Bola, he says she has been talking about you not fitting in. About Hajoon needing to be closer to his roots. The room felt very still. Outside, she could hear the faint audio from Sunhee's drama through the earphones. Where did Uncle Biodun get this? Bola asked. Her voice was very even. He knows someone who knows someone. You know how he is. Mama, Uncle Biodun once told me that Hajoon was going to give me bird flu because all Korean men eat dogs. He is not exactly a reliable source. Bola. Her mother's voice sharpened. I am not saying it is all true. I am saying it is enough to be careful. You are there alone. You are in his country. If his mother is working against you. She is sitting in my living room watching a drama. Bola. I have to go, Mama. She hung up. She sat on the bed. She looked at the wall for a while. Here is what nobody tells you about being in an intercultural marriage, the real version, not the YouTube travel couple version. The threat doesn't always come from where you're watching. Sometimes it comes from your own side. Sometimes the people who love you most are the ones who hand you the fear you weren't carrying yet and say, here, hold this, it belongs to you. And because you love them back, because you trust them, you take it. You hold it. And then it starts to feel like yours. Bola got up and went to the living room. Sunhee looked up from her drama. She pulled one earphone out, politely, which was something. Bola sat down on the other end of the couch. She said in her slow, careful Korean, Can I ask you something? Sunhee's eyes sharpened with attention. She nodded. Do you want Hajoon to come back to Daejeon? The silence was very long. Sunhee looked at her with an expression Bola could not entirely read. Then she took out the other earphone. She muted the drama. She turned on the couch to face Bola more fully. She spoke. Slowly, for Bola's benefit. And Bola's 40% Korean stretched itself to 70, and then further because this was not a moment where she could afford to miss words. I wanted him home, Sunhee said. 2 years ago, yes. I thought. It was too fast. Too different. I didn't know you. I didn't know anything about where you came from. And I was afraid. A pause. I am still afraid sometimes. Not of you. Of losing him to a life I cannot reach. Bola was quiet. But I watched you, Sunhee continued. These 2 weeks. The way you cook. The way you look at him when he's not looking. My husband used to look at me like that. She stopped. Her hands, folded in her lap, tightened slightly. I didn't come here to take him from you. I came here because I am old and I was lonely and I wanted to understand what his life looks like. What you look like in it. The living room was very quiet. On the muted TV screen, 2 characters were having a conversation with captions Bola couldn't read. And Bola said, What do you see? Sunhee almost smiled. I see a woman who put jollof rice on the stove at 7 in the morning because she was nervous about my visit and needed something to do with her hands. She paused. The apartment smelled like it before I even came through the door. Bola looked at her. You noticed that? I noticed everything. A pause. Mothers do. Something in Bola's chest did a complicated thing. She had arrived at this conversation carrying her uncle's words like ammunition, and now she was sitting here with them suddenly feeling very heavy and very unnecessary. She said in English without thinking, I was told you were planning to take him back to Hajoon. Sun-hee frowned slightly at the switch in language, then seemed to understand the gist. Who told you that? My family. Someone told my family. Sun-hee shook her head slowly. Then she said something Bola needed to run through her dictionary twice. When she found the translation, she sat with it for a moment. He already left me once, was what it meant. I know better than to try to make a man return by force. It never works. You only lose them faster. Bola went to her bedroom and called Kemi. Tell Uncle Bio done, she said when her sister picked up, to find something else to do with his time. Now, here is where this story turns. And it turns on the jollof rice. Of course it does. Because that is what this has always been about. Not the rice itself, but what the rice meant. What it was standing in for. Every pot of jollof rice Bola had ever made was a piece of where she came from. And this story ends the way it ends because of a decision she made on the last Friday of Sun-hee's visit. She made a full pot. Not the quick version. The real version. The way her mother made it in Lagos, with a tomato and pepper base blended and fried until the raw smell cooked out, which took 40 minutes of standing at the stove and stirring. With the smoky bottom, the party jollof bottom, where the rice catches slightly on the pot and turns dark and rich and irreplaceable. With fried plantain on the side. With moin moin. She made all of it. She started at noon for a 7 o'clock dinner. The apartment filled with the smell, the warm, insistent, this is who I'm smell of a Nigerian kitchen transplanted to Seoul. Sun-hee watched from the dining table, working on a crossword in a Korean newspaper, and said nothing. But she kept looking up. At 4, she put the newspaper down and came to the kitchen doorway. She said something. Bola turned. Sorry. Sun-hee repeated it. Bola caught. Teach me. She looked at her mother-in-law for a moment. Then she pointed at the stove. You want to help? Sun-hee raised an eyebrow in a way that clearly meant, I said teach me, not help me. There is a difference. Bola almost smiled. She moved slightly to the side and made room at the stove. What followed was the most patient cooking lesson Bola had ever given. More patient even than teaching her students grammar. Because every instruction had to be simplified and supplemented with gesture and repetition. Because Sun-hee approached cooking the way she seemed to approach most things. Carefully, with full attention, refusing to pretend she understood something until she actually did. When Hajoon came home at 6:30, the jollof rice was done. The plantain was fried. The moin moin was cooling. His mother and his wife were standing at the kitchen counter together, both slightly sweaty from the stove heat, and his mother was eating fried plantain directly from the plate with a specific unguarded satisfaction of someone who had never eaten it before and immediately understood why it existed. What? He stopped. He looked at the table. He looked at his mother. He looked at his wife. Sit down, Hajoon, Bola said. He sat down. He served himself. He ate. And the jollof rice was, by any objective measure, the best batch she had made since moving to Korea. Sometimes the conditions make the cook. Sometimes you need the right audience. Sun-hee ate slowly. She went back for seconds, which was the only verdict that mattered. And halfway through the meal, she said something to Hajoon that made him go very still. Bola vaited. What did she say? Hajoon looked at his mother. Then at Bola. His expression was strange. Not sad, not exactly happy. Moved, she would call it later, when she told Kemi the story. He looked moved. She said, he translated slowly, that the rice tastes like someone who knows where they come from. And she said. He stopped, cleared his throat. She said that's what she wanted for her grandchildren. To taste like somewhere. The table was quiet for a moment. Then Bola laughed. Not the big, belly laugh from the kitchen that first Tuesday. A smaller one. Softer. The kind that comes when something is both funny and completely true. Son, he looked at her, not understanding the words but understanding the sound. And she laughed too. Carefully at first, then fully, the way old women laugh when they finally let themselves, with the whole face. And Hajoon sat between them looking like a man who had just witnessed something he hadn't known he needed to see. Sun Hee left on Sunday. At the apartment door, with her 2 suitcases and the smaller bag, now lighter, most of the Korean ingredients incorporated into the last 2 weeks of cooking, she turned to Bola. She did not hug her. They were not hugging yet. That would take longer. That would take more visits and more kitchen negotiations and more patient hours of broken language slowly building toward fluency. But she took Bola's hand in both of hers and held it for a moment. And she said something, just to Bola, not to Hajoon, not for translation. Bola's Korean caught enough of it. Most of it, even. "You are strong," was the first part. "My son chose well," was the second. And then the third part, which Bola almost missed, which came quiet and quick and took her a moment to fully decode. "Call me Iamianam. If you want. You don't have to. But you can." Sun Hee picked up her bag. The elevator came. The doors closed. Hajoon and Bola stood in the hallway. He put his arm around her shoulder. She leaned into him. Through the elevator door, they could hear, very faintly, the sound of the floors ticking downward. "You okay?" Hajoon said. "Yes," Bola said. A pause. "Did she say anything to you?" At the end. "Yes." "Are you going to tell me what she said?" Bola thought about it. About the word. The specific word Sun Hee had given her. Offered, really, the way you offer something that is yours and costs you to give. "Eventually," she said. They went back inside. The apartment was theirs again, fully and quietly, though it felt different from the way it had been a month ago. Not smaller. More full. Like something had been added that didn't have a name yet. The next morning, Bola made jollof rice for breakfast. She had never done this before. Hajoon came into the kitchen still half asleep, stopped, looked at the pot, and looked at her. "Rice for breakfast? It's better the second day," she said. "You know this." He tasted it. He made a face. The quiet one. The one she had learned to translate. "Better than yesterday?" she asked. "Don't fish," he said. But he served himself a full bowl. She watched him eat. She thought about what Sun Hee had said, that the rice tastes like someone who knows where they come from. She thought about what it meant for a child to taste like somewhere. She thought about what it would mean for a child to taste like 2 somewheres at once. Not confused. Just full. Bigger than one place. Wider than one language. She had not told Hajoon yet what she had been thinking about for the past month. What she had been quietly, privately, cautiously thinking about. The thought she had been holding in her chest and examining from different angles to see if it was real or just the feeling that always follows a hard thing survived. She was going to tell him tonight. Over dinner, probably. With the windows open because the November air had turned clean and cold, and Seoul in autumn had a particular quality she had never experienced in Lagos. A sharpness, a clarity, like everything was in slightly higher resolution. She was going to tell him that she had changed her mind about waiting. That the year they had agreed on didn't feel necessary anymore. That something about this last month, the kitchen, the hard conversations, the Sunday morning with her mother-in-law standing at the stove holding a ladle like a question, had moved something in her. Had made the future feel closer and less frightening and somehow more possible. She was going to tell him. But just as she was composing how to begin, her phone buzzed on the counter. She picked it up. A message. Lagos number. Not Kemi. Not her mother. Uncle Biodun. She almost didn't read it. She was this close to setting the phone face down and letting the moment stay what it was. But she read it. "Call me when you have a moment. Something you need to know about Hajoon's family. I found more." She set the phone down. She looked at Hajoon eating his jollof rice. He looked up and smiled at her, the unguarded morning face smile that she loved best. She picked the phone back up. She did not call Uncle Biodun. She typed, Not now. She put the phone down again. She sat down across from Hajoon. She served herself a bowl. Bola, he said. You're looking at me weird. I have something to tell you, she said. He put his spoon down. His face did the attentive thing. Fully present, all attention gathered toward her, the way he had always been able to make her feel like the only thing in the room. This was one of the things she had loved first. Before the language exchange, before the first coffee, before the years, this. The quality of his attention. She opened her mouth. And then her phone rang. Not a message this time. A call. And the name on the screen was not Uncle Bio Dunn. It was Sun Hee. Hajoon saw it. His eyes went from the phone to her face. Why is my mother calling you? I don't know, Bola said. Honestly. She did not know. She answered. Ia mianim. The word came out before she thought about it. The word Sun Hee had offered at the elevator door. There was a pause on the line. And then she heard Sun Hee exhale. A small, relieved sound, barely audible. The sound of someone receiving something they had offered without certainty it would be taken. And then Sun Hee started talking, fast and urgent, and Bola's Korean, still climbing, caught fragments. Caught enough. Caught the word for hospital. Caught the word for test results. Caught something that sounded like, it was supposed to be nothing, but. Hajoon was already on his feet. He had seen Bola's face. What? He said. Bola, what is it? She was still on the phone. She was listening as hard as she had ever listened to anything in her life. And here is the thing about this moment, the real thing, the thing that matters. Even with everything unresolved. Even with Uncle Biodun's message sitting unopened. Even with the conversation she had been about to have still unspoken between them. Even with all of it. Bola reached across the table and took Hajoon's hand. He held on. She held on too. And whatever came next, and something was coming, something serious, something that would ask more of both of them than a month-long visit or a pot of jollof rice or a kitchen lesson ever had, they would face it from this same place they had always come back to. 2 people. 2 kitchens. 1 table. The jollof rice is cooling in the pot. And a phone call that was about to change everything.